to another of the Teaching Academy Professional Development Series, this time round for 2026-60. We're at week -2, so we're getting into the business end of students getting access to sites, setting up assessments, subject outlines being published, configuring assessment portals, etc. So it is a very good time for us to be talking about the tool which has recently been introduced in session 30 this year for staff and students to use for bookings, which is Microsoft Bookings. We're going to be talking a lot about that both this week and next week. The difference between the sessions between this week and next week is this week we're going to focus on the bookings tool, getting you familiar with the interface, how to set it up and use it, how it works in terms of provisioning that service to students, getting it into your Brightspace sites, for example. Next week, we'll be looking more at the implementation of it in terms of when we actually run the Teams meetings, which connect to bookings for those supervised assessments. So there's implications for recordings, what that experience looks like for your markers, for example, the type of evidence that we get after the fact, what you do with those assets, etc. So that's all next week. This week we are looking at Microsoft Bookings. It's also a timely intervention because there are some changes being made to this service this week, so we can talk a little bit about that as well. And a lot of that is on the back of the fact that after a session of having used this tool, there's been a lot of lessons learnt, so to speak, things that have worked, things that haven't worked so well, and so there have been some adjustments that have been made. The first of those, in terms of big changes, is that they are provisioning a whole new set of school shared booking accounts this week that all staff that have access to them currently will be given access to as well. But it's to fix some of the errors that were happening with the original system, with it not being the confirmation that students would receive, for example, depending on the type of email accounts they had, might get sent to junk, for example, might go to other types of locations rather than their inbox. That's all been fixed now, and the way that we fix that is by provisioning these new shared accounts. But I'll get more into that a little later on. Most of the time today I'm going to be spending inside the tool itself, inside MS Bookings. So this board really is a kind of a dance card for me to follow so I don't drift too wildly off track. But I'll talk a little bit about some context around this tool first before we jump in. So let's have a look. Nope, that's not it. Thank you very much, Elise. And as always with these sessions, please feel free to use the chat to drop your questions, etc. in there, comments. I will stop periodically for us to kind of discuss different points if you want to do that, or if you've got a burning question, by all means, just put your hand up and we'll go from there. All right, so first up, as I said, today we're going to be looking at the Microsoft Bookings system itself. We'll look at how the services are created and then customized by presumably the subject convener. We'll talk a little bit about staff availability, assuming that you might be managing marking teams or other individuals, and then how we provision the service. Why are we using Bookings? All right, this particular tool has been sourced and set up with the idea of coordinating multiple staff needing to use it for supervised assessment. In most instances, that's a convener with a marking team, but it works at the individual level. It works for 2 people. It can work with up to 30 people. The more people you have in this equation using it, staff-wise, I guess I'm not going to say the more complex it gets, but the more moving parts you have, because you need individuals using the service to be doing different things to make sure it's working for them as well. It does allow us to put in things like our scheduling needs into how we set up our appointments, how long they go for, the amount of lead time, etc. that students can have to make bookings, to cancel bookings. We can put rules in place for how it's accessed, and most importantly, we can cater to staff availability. It is also integrated or connected with other tools that we use, which basically means Teams and Outlook, 2 other Microsoft products. And that means that when bookings are made from the staff side of things, it's going to go into your calendar. And then when we actually launch the meetings, we get to use Teams, just like we are now. And hopefully there's a level of familiarity that we can all benefit from as a result of that. So by default, the arrangement is bookings happen in Microsoft Bookings. They end up inside your Outlook calendar, and when you're ready to launch them, they will open in Teams. 3 different tools, all Microsoft, all working together. All right, so students, when they join this, come in as guests. They don't get access to recordings. We'll talk more about recordings and other things next week, but just as a heads up. So really the onus is on the markers in this equation to handle the recordings that happen. That means initiating the recordings. That means potentially doing something with the recording files later on so that they're available centrally at a school level. As I mentioned, we are going to talk more about recordings next week. Okay. Yes, it means that recordings will happen in Microsoft Teams unless you turn it off. At that point, you can decide to just use this for bookings, for anything really. But our default scenario when we're talking about supervised assessment is student makes the bookings in a booking service, and then when the event occurs itself, it launches inside Teams. So that's our kind of starting point. All right, who does what in this equation? If you're not already familiar with your faculty subjects team, get them on speed dial or have a copy of their email address somewhere, or at least know how to access them, because they are the ones ultimately that have carriage over the shared bookings accounts and the staff that are inside those accounts. So if you don't have access to this, you'll be emailing the subjects team and saying, please add me to the school's booking page. So they are particularly important in this equation. Ultimately, logging a Sherwell ticket, for example, will end up getting you directed back towards contacting the school, the faculty subjects team. Subject conveners in this space, they create a new booking service, and we end up using that term a lot in this space. We'd probably call it an event, but basically when you set up a new booking service, that terminology will be prevalent in all of the support documentation and any videos that you watch, etc. They're going to keep talking about the service. What do your markers do in this space? They go into the meetings that are set up. They'll hit record, obviously. They'll work through potentially a script with the students, supervise the assessment itself, probably taking notes, looking at rubrics and other things if they're marking in situ, and then maybe they're going to revisit that recording later on when they refine and finalise the marks. So we have 3 different agents in this space, and we haven't even started talking about students at this point. But presumably they attend the event, conduct the assessment with the marker, and then they disappear. They don't get hold of the recordings. All right, I think what I'm going to do at that point is now get the Padlet board off the screen, and we'll have a look at the booking service itself. So bear with me. Get that over here. All right, so I'm going to go to a new tab in Outlook and say that the first thing that's going to happen to you in this space is that you're going to get sent an email telling you that you've been added to the school's shared booking page. And that email ultimately will look like this. So this is just an Outlook window, but basically it's going to be talking about you being invited to accept meetings from a school bookings calendar. So for me, this is talking about the School of Business. You might get one from, obviously with your school name in there, but it will be an invite. It'll be talking about a booking calendar. Maybe you want to search for that. But it is really important that you keep hold of this email. Don't just delete it out of hand, because at least once, the very first time that you get it, you have to accept this invite. And that'll be done by clicking on this Go to Bookings. And that will take you into the page, and it will give you a pop-up that says you're going to get meeting invites from this bookings page. And as long as you've received this at least once, you clicked on that Go to Bookings page, you'll then be able to use this service whenever you like. Make bookings within the school's booking page. If not, again, you're going to have to contact the subjects team and say, I need my email so that I can access this. You only have to do it once, but if you've deleted that email by mistake, it's going to be a problem. All right, so at this stage, I'm going to click on, yep, I've got it. I'm now looking at my MS Bookings page, and the base address for that, if I type it in here, bookings, it ends up going to outlook.office.com/bookings. That is the base address to access this service from anywhere, from home and other places. Now, we had a question there, I think, Elise. Did I see something in the chat?
Yeah, that's correct, Lachlan. We've got two questions. The first from Veronica, just regarding sharing of the recordings. So she's just checking if it's possible and appropriate to share with students for revision, revisiting, resitting or reflection purposes.
Look, by default, they're not available to students, and you're not going to be able to share it to them from the recording doesn't appear in a chat stream, for example, the same way that it does in our normal Teams meeting. The recordings end up sitting in the individual markers OneDrive folder, and it needs to be stored somewhere centrally. So the standard scenario is it's for marking, for grading. It's not to be shared back with students. However, that's not to say that there aren't lots of instances where we do share recordings with students, but you're going to need to get that recording somewhere else where they can access it. So if that was the case, it would involve potentially putting it in somewhere like Panopto or somewhere else for them to see it. I mean, we can talk about it offline, but I'd be looking potentially at maybe an alternative arrangement for that if one of the end goals is the recordings being made available to students, because there's easier ways to do it. That's all. Next question.
Yep, and this one's from Jody. Do we have to notify someone that we have supervised assessments in order to get the subject team to set us up?
No. No. Technically, all staff, all teaching staff within the schools can get access to bookings. You just email the subjects team and say, I'm in this school, you need to add me to it, and they add you to it. That's it. There's no other information needed to provide around that.
Thanks, Lachlan.
No problem. All right, so what I'm looking at the bookings page is two different sections. The top section talks about personal booking pages, and I'm telling you from the outset here, we're not going to be dealing with personal pages at all. The scenario that we want is shared booking pages, and particularly the school that you are in. I can see all of them. You guys will just see the school that you're in. And the reason for that is the only way that anyone else apart from yourself can get access to these pages and potentially pick up the pieces if something goes pear-shaped. So, for example, the marker has got 10 student interviews happening on a particular day. They're sick. They're not available. If someone had created those booking pages in one of these personal areas, no one else gets access to it. There's no way that we can reallocate those or give them to someone else or even get the links to them. We do them inside a shared page precisely for that reason. You'll have other people within the school and even logging a support ticket, etc., who'll be able to get into the shared page and then divvy out those meetings to someone else to pick up if necessary. It's important that we use the shared booking pages for this scenario. And we've had already instances where people have gone off and said, no, I'm perfectly comfortable using the personal pages and I don't think there'll be a problem. And all of my individual markers will go and create their own personal pages. And they're all comfortable with it as well. And it was perfectly good until it wasn't. And then no one else gets access to it. And then however many hundred students needed to be notified that the meeting needs to be redone, reorganized, etc., etc. So, shared bookings pages. I'm going to go into, let's pick on nursing. Okay, so what we're looking at now is the opening page for the School of Nursing. Sorry, Paramedicine and Health Science, bigger name. And this base page basically shows me all of the staff that have been added in here in this huge big calendar that I'm not going to be looking at all. There's just most of this page, to be honest, I'm not interested in. What we are interested in is these menu options over here on the left-hand side. This is the area that you're going to be focusing on. And in fact, there's only a couple of the items in here. If I can zoom in a little, that might help, that we're going to concentrate on. The bookings page is a booking page for the entire school. We don't use that. We're creating these things for us individually. And as I mentioned before, the term that we're using for this is services. So going into the services area, what we can see here is all of the individual Microsoft Bookings services that have been set up by different subject conveners. We can see those durations happening. We can see that there is a naming convention which has been utilized when these are set up. And we can also see some names, etc., initials of staff that have been added. But this is our list of all of the supervised assessments which have been set up for 2026-30 in this instance. We can see that nice and clearly because they've followed the naming convention. And if we needed to find something quickly, we can of course search that and look for whatever subject code, etc., that's been put into that name. So being quite deliberate about naming when you set up a service is something that we harp on about precisely for this reason. If you're in a big school, lots of services set up over time, how do we narrow that down? Clear naming conventions of the session that we're teaching into, of the assessment number, of the name of the subject, all that kind of stuff makes all of this much easier to deal with. If you start naming them, a name that is not conventional, for example, it's going to make that a little bit harder. All right, so really what we're going to be getting into shortly is the process of creating a new booking service. So we'll be adding to this list, but I'd rather talk a little bit more about this screen that we're looking at now before we get into the nuts and bolts. So as I mentioned, we've got our list here of services. If I zoom out a little bit, on the right-hand side, what we have is a preview area, which will give me more information about whichever service has been highlighted in this list. So if I was to click on that one, it then has the name of the service up the top here in the preview. It'll allow me to edit that and make changes to it. I can add appointments to it myself manually if I needed to on behalf of someone else. I get a summary of information. So there's actually a bookings page link here, which we're interested in getting at the end of this process. If you're curious, you can copy the link there and say, what does this actually look like? I can copy and paste the... No, we're not opening that, Lachlan. All we're doing is pasting a link. Right, so that's a bookings page. There's the subject, the duration, there's a calendar, and presuming as long as we're looking at the date period that's been carved out for this, we'd be able to see dates available and we could start making bookings. But that's what they look like after we create them. And we also have the ability to then embed them inside Brightspace as well. So this is our end game. We're going to create a service that ends up giving us a calendar that we can make bookings into. So going back to our bookings page, there's our summary. It also tells me which staff have been allocated to this particular service. And you'll see that there's a few tabs, etc., that we can go into. So this is what we can see when we click on the services area inside the menu, inside bookings. And this is the place you'll be coming to most often in here. The other area that I'm going to point you to, probably the only other menu option in this service that we're interested in, is the staff area. And that will give you a list of all of the people who have been added to this account for this school. And as I mentioned before, the subjects team can add other people in here, but all conveners will be added into this space as administrators, and all of the markers who get added into the booking service, when they get added in here, get added as team members. And the difference between team members and administrators is administrators can create their own booking service and add markers to it. The team members cannot. So that's the distinction. Conveners will be admin, markers will be team members. All right, so you probably won't be coming in here a whole lot yourself, but that's just to explain those two main menu items that we're dealing with. Don't touch any of the others. They're really of no value to you, and you could in fact break something. So stay away from them. Services and staff are the two areas that we really want to be looking at. Let me stop there for a moment and check in with our co-hosts. Elise, Tom, anything going on in the chat that I need to...
Not at this time.
Okay. Any questions from the floor? Anybody at this point that you want to ask, or am I good to keep going? All right.
Lachlan, I noticed no one talks about subject coordinators.
Okay, so I've always been interested in the distinction between the use of the term conveners and coordinators here. It does seem to change quite often depending on the context, but in the staff area, when I talk about the convener, I'm talking about the coordinator at the same point. They'll be added as admin as well. Same thing. It's only it's only the markers in that space who get added in as team members as such. Yep.
Good.
Thanks for that. That's a great question. Jody.
Yeah, does this system, because it's Microsoft, does it interact with Teams? So will I be able to see the bookings into my Teams calendar?
Absolutely.
Or Microsoft calendar?
Yep.
Cool.
Yep. Goes into Outlook, goes into Teams. Yep. All right. So the next thing that we're going to be looking at here is the process of creating our own service. So we're going to begin that process by firstly going into the services area. There are the ones that other people have created. I'm going to create a new service up the top here, add a new service. And now we get to work through these different customization options within the service. So in this case, as I said, we want to follow a fairly specific naming convention. So what I'm going to suggest here is subject code. Then I'm going to talk about the session or the assessment number. I'm just reminding myself which one I've been telling people to do first. Feel free to jump in, anyone, if you can see it before I can. Session, thank you, Andrea, that's great. So 202660 will be the next session, then the assessment number, second assessment, and then if you're keen, you could actually put in the text type or the assessment type if you're after that. So if this was going to be a mini Viva as one example, I would put that in there. Right, so that's given me all the specifics that I need at any point in the future to be able to search and narrow down and find this particular setup. Don't worry about the description, it's irrelevant, it's not actually visible to a lot of people, so we'll leave that alone. Our next area underneath, you'll see under location, there is an option here that says add online meeting. Now this will actually stay on if you've selected it in the past. I think the last time I was using this, I turned it off because I was demonstrating something else. But when it's talking about online meeting, it means Microsoft Teams. So it's going to create a Teams meeting connected to these bookings at the same time as it's provisioning them. And I'm going to check this box that says send an anonymous meeting link to customers, otherwise known as students in this case. Then we'll keep going with setting this up. How long is your supervised assessment going to go for? The default option that's in here is 30 minutes. However, keep in mind that you really need to bake into this however much time your marker is going to need to finish what they're doing inside the supervised assessment. So as an example, quite often people will have a 15-minute slot, and maybe they've made the session, the booking times for this 30 minutes, which allows for the marker to finish up their marking processes or whatever it is that they're doing before the next one commences. If you try and do this without baking in that kind of time, it's going to probably not work amazingly for the marker unless their time management is exceptional in a way that we don't kind of see when you're handling these at scale. So keep that in mind when you're setting the duration for your supervised assessments. So I'm going to leave this at 30 minutes. I don't use the buffer time option. We generally tell people to bake it into the duration up here rather than trying to turn on an additional setting which will add these spaces in between bookable slots. It just starts to get really unwieldy in terms of your calendars and time slots. It's just far easier to create the duration to include that additional time that you need. Don't worry about price or notes. Down here we get to number of attendees. By default, this is going to work with one student making one booking with one marker. That's kind of our standard scenario. There are ways to go beyond that. But let's talk about what that means when we change this number from one attendee to more than one attendee. If there's two, it means that a student would be able to go in and make a booking, and then another student would see that same time slot on the calendar and also be able to add themselves to it. Do you want two students in the same space together, or were you perhaps thinking, in fact, it needs to be organised in a different way? In most instances where we're talking about a group booking, we would encourage you to just have one student making the booking and then we can share it with other students rather than trying to get this thing to allow multiple people to access the same booking time slot, because invariably they're never the students that we actually want in the same space. They end up being a random selection of people in that same slot. I'm not saying that there aren't instances where that's going to work out for you. If you just want the first three to book the slot can all jump in together, but if it's for a group booking and those groups have been established somewhere else, don't make this multiple attendees in here. Just have one of them in the group make that booking. So I'm going to leave this at one attendee. And then the last option that we have down here is let customers manage their appointment when it was booked by you or your staff on their behalf. What that actually means is if students need to cancel or reschedule a booking that's been made, they can do so. So I'm going to turn that on. So that's the first lot of customizations that we have under basic details. Let's continue. Then we go into availability options. And remembering that the duration we set for this was 30 minutes. So make sure that whatever this time increment option is the same as the duration that you set, because this will be the increments that appear on the calendar as well. So I want them to be the same. So that's 30 minutes. Lead time means how far in advance of the session can a student cancel their booking or make a booking. So that means I'm going to cut this off 24 hours before the actual time of the event. They can make a booking anytime up until 24 hours before. They can cancel a booking up until 24 hours before. You can change this if you like. If you want it to be 0, you could, but the default option here is 24 hours. And then you've got maximum lead time, which means how far in advance of the thing can they start making bookings. I think the default for most people is a year, 365 days or something, but you can make this as big or as small as you like. Just make sure, if you're wondering why they can't see the calendar or make bookings yet, it may very well be because your max lead time isn't as long as you want it to be. So I'm going to maybe set that on to whatever, a longer period of time. Okay, we're going to talk about availability, which is one of the most important settings that we have when we create a booking service. The standard option that's on here says bookable when staff are free. So if you were thinking about setting one of these bookings events up, services, as some kind of consultation, then this might make sense. Look at my calendar, see when I'm available, and then you can make a booking each week when I'm free. But in a supervised assessment, we're normally talking about a very specific date, if not date range. So, and that might be based on marker availability, it might be based on your availability. So really, just saying bookable when they're free is not really going to work for us. So I'm going to hit the drop-down option here and go into custom hours. And that now gives me the ability to then start carving out availability based on days. And it's talking about weekly recurring availability. And if we look down underneath, we now have the option as well to customize this based on a date range. That sounds more like what I'm looking for in this case. So if I've got an event and I'm saying I'm setting this up for next week, for example, whatever the date might be next week, sometime in July, I'm going to click on that option and say, let's carve out the dates that I want this to happen from. So if I'm going to say I'm going to set up supervised assessment that's happening on, let's go with Monday the 13th and Tuesday the 14th. I'm going to head into July and say start on that day. And I want you to go until the following day. And then at that point, I can change this. Again, it's trying to say, oh, when staff are free, or I can now make this custom. I really would advise you to use the custom hours that you set in this system first and foremost, because it's going to be checking the availability and the slots available to students based on the times that you carve out in here. It's the easiest way to use this tool. If you set up a service and say, well, this is for either yourself or maybe for a particular marker, you can carve out these custom hours based on when that person is available. So that's one way of using Microsoft Bookings. One service, one marker, one set of availability, and you only have to do it in here. You don't have to set it up anywhere else. Once we start talking about multiple markers inside the same service, this becomes a little bit more complex because we've got more moving parts. We'll talk more about that multiple marker scenario shortly, but I'm going to follow through with that idea of one service, one marker, one set of availability in here. Now, I said this was happening on a Monday and a Tuesday, so I'm going to say that for me, maybe the marker for this is only going to be available between 11 and 3 on the Monday, and maybe 9 o'clock in the morning, and then lunchtime on the Tuesday, just for argument's sake. And the rest of the days don't really count because this is only between a Monday and a Tuesday. But just to ease my mind here, I'm going to delete the other days. They're not relevant. All right, so those have been set at the moment. But you can also see that we have this custom availability happening up the top here. You can, in fact, ignore that at this point because you've carved out this the actual dates and days underneath. So that's what we want available underneath. But if you're worried about these, you can then get rid of those as well and delete them. All right, I know there's going to be a lot of questions around availability and who can access and do what. That's definitely going to happen. So we'll start dealing with those now. Elise, if you want to start rattling those off for me.
Thanks, Lachlan. Sorry, I'm just replying to one, so I'll just get my bearings. Okay, so from Nikki, we have, is there a way to stop students making multiple bookings? I've had several make multiple bookings, then only attend one. Very cheeky of them.
Unfortunately, no, really. That's the sad answer in this space, is because students in this equation are guests or anonymous, basically, in this space, that the system itself has no provision to limit the number of bookings made because it has no way of actually checking that they are this student who's made the one booking. So it has to be handled then in terms of outside of bookings, which means potentially comms, like your communication with the students saying, don't do that, only make the one. Or if you're unable to do the one, then you can cancel. That's really the only way of managing it when they do it, unfortunately. So building that kind of that habit, if they're doing it recurring and getting used to that across different subjects, that they're only meant to be doing this once. Yeah, I don't have a better answer for you in that case, Nikki. The system itself has no way of actually preventing a person making a second booking because it doesn't actually know specifically who they are. They're a guest, yeah. Next question.
So this one's from Daniel, and it's just about the way that the Bookings platform speaks to other applications. Mm-hmm. So does Bookings automatically block out other events, i.e. not other student bookings, but if I have another meeting in my Outlook calendar, will that automatically show as not available? And I believe that is how it works, but I thought we would just get your response to that one, Lachlan.
Yeah, so look, every you remember that one of the tabs on the left here that we were looking at before was staff, the other tab. Every staff member inside Microsoft Bookings has some options that they can customize with their accounts. One of those is talk to Outlook when using this service, refer to Outlook. And by toggling that on, it will actually look at your availability in Outlook to also inform the calendar as well. So we'll have a look at that setting and staff customization after we've created our first service, but the answer is yes.
And we just have a couple from Joe as well. So just regarding blocking out times in your own calendar in case you need a break during your supervised assessment schedule. So you can just block that out in Outlook and your calendar will speak, Bookings will speak to that Outlook calendar. Is that right, Lachlan? And you can also do it within the Bookings app itself.
So you're right on both counts. My personal advice is that you actually build that in to your custom hours. Really, I think the fewer different sources that it's trying to consult to determine whether someone is available or not outside the original bookings area, the better. So I would probably be carving that out and saying, it's a really great question because I can show you right now. Let's say, for example, between 11 and 3, I also wanted half an hour for my lunch. that I didn't want to be bookable. You'll see that on the right hand side here, I've got a plus. I can add in another time slot on the Monday. So maybe in the first instance, I'm now going to make this 11 to 1. And now I can make this from 1:30 through until whenever that other time slot was, whether it was 5 or 3 or whatever. Right? Once you actually do that, it means that half an hour is now just not going to be visible for people to book. So I would encourage you to do it at this level.
Great. So my usual calendar, Outlook, all sorts, I have blocked out of things out and doing it because I've been, so that's that way.
Yeah, I think this is the best way to do it, because even though conceptually, yes, it talks to Outlook. Yes, it looks at your own preferences and things. We do get crossovers sometimes between the systems. Sometimes they don't sync immediately straight away. Sometimes you get, almost like it seems like students have slipped through the cracks somehow because it's looking at other systems and hasn't yet updated the bookings calendar. I'm just advising that you step away from all of that by making sure that the original source, the service that you've carved out here, only has the times that you want to be used for the service in here, in these custom hours. Yep. And if that means that you're doing that for yourself and a group of markers that all have the same availability, I know as random as that sounds, then you could do it like this, carving out one set of custom hours for everybody to use. But otherwise, we then start going down that road of individual customization, which we will be looking at in a bit.
Thanks, Lachlan. And then just the final question that we have at the moment is just regarding if an academic a marker needs to cancel a bookings appointment. Do they do that through the bookings client or through Microsoft Calendar? Does it matter?
It doesn't matter. Are we talking about the student or are we talking about the marker?
The marker. So if they need to cancel an appointment that a student has made.
Yeah, right. Okay. So great example. If we go and find, let me get this Teams thing out of the way. That's really annoying. Go over there. All right. So let's go. I'll open bookings up in another tab for a second, just so I can show you where this is exactly. Yeah. Nursing. Now I'm not actually going to cancel this booking, but I'm going to show you how we would go about cancelling. All right, let's have a look. Inside the preview of this subject here, 304, you'll see one of the tabs in here talks about calendar and availability, which will give me a calendar specifically for this assessment and the set of bookings that were made for this. So if I move back through this, I'm expecting to see some assessments and bookings in here. I have no idea what date it was run, however, so this could be a lengthy process. Hopefully not. Anybody? When did we run the OSCE?
If you do the one up the top, the first one, that was last Thursday.
Oh, beautiful. Whoever my guardian angel was just there, thank you. So it was last Thursday, was it? The 18th? No, too far.
Should be, yeah. Oh.
Might be taking a minute for it to filter through. Sometimes it can be a little. So it was 304?
Yep, and there was one on Bathurst last Thursday.
Was this the Bathurst portal? However, maybe it was. Hang on, let me have a look. There we go. There's two. What's this one?
Last Thursday, the 25th, so it's the 5th.
Okay. I just want to find one where there's actually some bookings in here. Whoops. 25th. Maybe we'll make some bookings in my own calendar first before I try and find them, and then we can cancel them. We'll come back to that. All right, so I've made some time slots customizations available for this one, saying that it's going to be happening next Monday and Tuesday. All right, let's just continue through creating the service, and then we can play around with the service that we create, and I can show you the cancellation process there. Sorry, I'll getting ahead of myself. The next option that we have when we're creating a service is under assign staff, and this is who's going to be marking this. And that means that when a booking is made, both the student making the booking and the staff member that's been allocated will receive the information for the booking. The link to join the meeting, for example, the slot in their Outlook calendars. So at the moment, no one's been assigned, but I'm going to allocate someone and I can search for them in this list. I don't know if you're in here, Elise. There you are. I'm going to say Elise is the person I'm allocating to this particular event. But I can add more than one staff member to it in the event that you want multiple markers in here. That's what you're going to be doing. One service and adding multiple markers in here. When there are multiple markers added, so I might add this guy in here as well. So right, I've got so far 2 markers that are going to be involved in this service. And you'll notice that up the top here, there are some options in here are saying, do you want to allocate just one of those people to the service, or do you want both of them to be allocated to it? So at that point, by default, it's only going to choose one of them. And do you want students to be able to choose which marker they get to have? Right, so at that point, I don't want them to be able to choose. I want it to be randomized based on whoever's available, etc. But rather than them choosing, but there are scenarios where teachers have asked for these to be set up so that the students get to choose or nominate who their marker is. So I've added 2 markers to this service. Then we can move on to the custom fields area. What do they get when they make a booking? They're asked for, look for the blue ticks down the side. That's the options that are turned on currently. But over on the right dictates whether or not they're mandatory. So at the moment, they're being asked for their email, for their phone number, for their home address, for notes, for guest email addresses. No, I don't want any of that. So I'm going to go, no thanks, no thanks, no thanks. Maybe I just want their email and their phone number, and I absolutely want those things. So I'm turning them on. Turned on, mandatory, not mandatory on the right-hand side. But I can do more. What else? Custom fields. Now, in each of the school pages, you're probably going to find that other people have created services and created their own custom fields. So you'll see those underneath, and you can use those if you want to, or you can make your own. So for some people, it's going to be a text field. So in this case, for example, people have said, I want to see what their student number is. So yes, I want that, and yes, they have to provide it. It's up to you to turn these on, turn these off, or create your own text fields. And if we look at some of the other examples, someone here said, well, I want to see your subject code, which I would have thought was in the title, but anyway, what campus, what your group number is, what your group member names are, student IDs. So there's a fair bit of information that they're wanting them to provide when they make the booking. And maybe that scenario that we talked about before, where one student in a booking is making it on behalf of a whole bunch of people, that might make sense to include all of those names and things in there as well. So that's up to you to determine what information you want them providing when they make the booking. And you'll probably notice that I've steered away so far from clicking on Save Changes. And that's because the moment you click on that, it will close all of these options and I'll have to go back in and edit it again. So I'm saving my saving until the end. Last area for us to look at, notifications. So it's the email confirmation area that I'm concerned with. Our account doesn't enable us to send SMS messages reminding them. That's not available to us. So the area that I'm interested in is email confirmations. At the moment, there are 2 confirmations that will happen. One is prior to the event. There'll be a reminder. By default, it's set as 1 day before the event, and it looks like this. Just a quick message or reminder that your service is coming up. You can customize this. At that point, you go in here and tailor it and put in whatever message you like. You can also edit this and change the lead time that you want the reminder to go out. You can also add additional reminders if you want it to be the week before, the day before, the hour before. You can do all of that if you want to, but the default setup is 1 day before, and it's going to go to the student with this particular message. The other reminder that happens is actually a follow-up afterwards. 15 minutes after the event, they're going to get an email that says this thing. I would encourage you to actually get rid of this unless you have a very specific reason for the student getting a follow-up email automatically from the system. And also if you want them to be seeing this message saying book your next appointment. So if you remember, Nikki before was talking about that scenario where students were coming in and making multiple bookings. It may very well be as well that some of them, after the thing had finished, were getting an email straight away saying, book another appointment. This sounds more like that consultation type scenario as opposed to what we're doing with supervised assessment. So think very carefully about whether or not you want them to get a follow-up afterwards and whether you want them to be prompted to book another appointment, because that sounds like it might be more problems than it's worth. If that's the case, trash it on the right-hand side. Get rid of it. All right, so that concludes all of the setup options that we have when we create a new service. So for the moment, I'm going to click Save Changes. And the most recent service to be added will be added to the top of the list. So we can see there that my ABC 101 has been added, my Mini Viva that's in 2022-60, second assessment. There are the markers that have been added to it. There's my summary. I can grab the link to the booking page. I can drop it into the chat for you guys as well if you're curious. But at that point, if I put that into a browser tab and say, what does that look like? We now have our bookings page, and what we can see on our calendar is the 13th and 14th are now available. And if we were to click on those dates, we have our time slots identifiable here for people to click on and make bookings in. So feel free to make a booking if you're so inclined. But if I was a student coming in here to this page and going, oh, I want the 12 o'clock slot. At that point, underneath is where I add my details, remembering that I asked them for a student number and email address and phone number. There's no way I'm giving you all my number. Too many people have got it already. So then we put in a student number in here, and then we make our booking. So Lachlan, the student, has made a booking. He gets this thank you here, and I'm going to get a confirmation message via email shortly. Okay. And then as soon as that's finished, we have this final screen which says that's the time that was booked. But from this screen, you're also able to cancel it, reschedule it, or make a new booking. Otherwise, you're going back to the original bookings page. I'm not sure how many people are going to come in exactly at that same point after they've just made the booking and then cancel the booking from this screen. So I don't know how valuable that is. But if we wait for my email confirmation to come through, if I have a look at Outlook, I'm assuming I'm going to see that momentarily. Here we go. Let's bring that up, and I'll bring it onto the screen for you to look at. Okay, so Lachlan, the student, your booking is confirmed. There are the booking details, time, slot, the person that it's with, and there is a link to join the Teams meeting here as well. And I have the option from this email to reschedule, and it also gives me a summary of the details that I provided for the booking. So let's stop there for a moment. Elise, Tom, and chat, etc. Do we have any burning questions about the process at this point?
We don't appear to have any new questions since we answered the last, but there might be some if we just wanted to see if anyone wanted to put their hands up.
Yeah, absolutely. Looks like we're okay at this point. Otherwise, I can come back to those. All right, so students made the appointment. Let's have a look at what this has done to my actual calendar in Microsoft Bookings. So, okay, right. In my service, ABC 101, make sure you've highlighted the right one and that the name is at the top. I can't tell you how many times it's just defaulted to whichever item's at the top of the list, and I've almost clicked on someone else's service. We get our preview with our link, etc. But now if we go into calendar and availability, we can look at the specifics, remembering that this was set for the 14th, 13th and 14th, and we can see here in our mini calendar view here, we've got a summary, and when people have put in their name, I can see here that Patience has made this booking, so I can see at this thumbnail view already who's making the bookings. I can then click on those, and you can see I've got three options here: view, edit, cancel. Do not hit cancel unless you want to cancel the booking. The word here, cancel, literally means delete the appointment. Otherwise, just click somewhere else. I think we've gotten into this habit with a lot of software tools that cancel just means get out of the thing I'm looking at. In this case, cancel means cancel the appointment. So I can click on view to get the details of the appointment, and it will tell me time slot, who's the staff member that's doing it. Here's the student information here on the left-hand side. I can, in fact, at this point, edit that meeting, at which point the appointment's currently been made. It's happening with Elise. But if I needed to shift that to another marker that was also available for this service, I could then do that and put both of them on, or take Elise off, for example, and just have myself. You have that flexibility with this when you have multiple markers in the same space. So that's kind of handy in terms of the appointment. If you look underneath the date settings, apart from the fact that I can also change the date and time for this appointment if there's one available, looking down, we also get our Teams meeting information underneath, which means that I can get the link to the meeting here as well, and I could share that elsewhere if that was necessary. Right, so you're going to see a lot of similarity with other products like Teams and Outlook and other things in terms of the options that are available. But that's our summary of that single appointment. And again, notice up the top here, the word cancel. This is, again, clicking on this will delete the appointment. We don't want to do that at this stage. So just getting out of this would involve hitting the cross or hitting discard. Yep, I'm happy to get rid of that particular dialog window. Right, so I can click on that. It will color code your different markers and give them different colors in this space, but there's only probably about 6 or 7 colors that it uses. So if you've got more markers than that, you'll start seeing the same colors appear if the color coding is something that you're interested in. Right, here's another one here that was made. Who's this one with? Right, there's the marker. There's the problematic student that we have. She's a serial offender, this one. And we find that actually I don't want this appointment. I'm going to get rid of it. For whatever reason, we can't make it. So I'm going to shift her to another time slot. So at that point, I can edit this meeting and turn around and say, oh, we're going to shift that to a different time. At which point it'll only look at the times available in the calendar and say, actually, she's getting bumped to 2:30. And then I can update the booking. And then the student and the marker involved in that booking would then get the update through Teams and Outlook. And you can see that she's now been moved down to 2 o'clock. Sorry, V, just no good for me that time. All right, so that's how we can modify and manipulate the bookings when we set them up with that scenario of creating an individual service for one or more markers. Now, what I want to get into in the time that we have remaining, keeping in mind that we're going to continue our Microsoft Bookings and Process session next week as well, to look more at the running of the Teams meeting, the recordings, etc. I want to spend some more time now just briefly looking at customization, and particularly at the staff menu that's over here on the left-hand side. When we go into staff, and you're welcome to go into that page once you've been added yourself, search for your own name or any of your marker names, for example. So there's this guy. You'll notice that we have this option here to edit staff, but we can also see any of their upcoming appointments that are in here through this summary window. But I want to actually edit this so we can have a look at the options. First option that's in here, which should really be ticked, it says notify that staff member via email when a booking has been changed, etc. Well, I definitely want that on. I'm not sure why mine was off, but just make sure that you are going in and having a look at yourself and probably your marker settings as well, if they have turned on the right options or not. That color coding that we talked about before can be modified up here if that's something that you're interested in. Then underneath it has a section called availability. So this is talking about your general availability, and everybody's staff availability, their general availability will look like this, kind of 8 to 5. This comes from the system and is allocated to everybody until you change it. So if I wanted to make sure that my individual staff availability always reflected the fact that I was not available at particular times, you could come in here and customize this staff availability as well. So I think it's important to note that this is a bit of a double-edged sword, because the system, when it's trying to make bookings, will always refer back to this to see whether or not someone's available. And if you've customized this and forgotten about it, the individual staff member, and then gone and made bookings thinking, oh yeah, I'll be available at 1 o'clock, that'll be fine, but they've blocked that out in here, they'll never be able to see those booking slots available in an individual service. So that's what I mean by a double-edged sword. This is kind of sitting in the background. It will always refer to your general availability when determining whether you're available for a service. So it can be a little bit dangerous if you're starting to make this a bit too specific. So maybe your general availability needs to be customized, or maybe you just are happy to leave it between standard business hours, for example. This becomes more of an issue when you have markers that are only available to do things in particular windows. So let's say the marker who can only mark in the evenings at 6 o'clock at night on a Thursday and a Friday, for example, well, this availability would need to reflect that. Otherwise, it's going to come back and say, no, they're not available after 5 o'clock, and then those time slots just wouldn't be visible to students. So it is something that yourself and your markers will need to visit. And you may find that standard business hours have been turned on, and you'll see that they look at 9 to 5. So it's the same type of scenario to consider. Now that option that we talked about before, that Daniel was asking about in terms of office calendar impacting your availability, there is that setting in here. And that will mean that if you've already got a pre-existing booking happening inside your Outlook calendar, it will flow through and impact whether or not a booking can be made. So that can be toggled on. And it's really the same consideration that you have in terms of customizing business hours here. If you turn that on and the person has forgotten that they've blocked out in their Outlook calendars that they have something else on, etc., and then they're wondering why students can't make bookings, it'll be because there's something in their Outlook calendar already that is obstructing that event. So it can kind of work in both ways. If you're just using the hours that you set at the service level when you created your service, that's the only thing that you need to be worrying about. But if you're also getting it to look at Outlook at the same time, then it's another set of considerations in that space. So it's something that you'll need to determine whether you want it looking at Outlook or whether you just want it looking at bookings, and tell people to block out their availability. So it's I've seen people do it without issue in both ways. I've also seen problems crop up sometimes when people forget about what's happening inside Outlook as well. So those are the two areas that we've been looking at today, is the staff option inside the bookings page and the services area where we create our bookings. What I would encourage you to do, assuming that you have access to your school's bookings page, is to go ahead and create some test bookings areas and allocate people to them yourself, etc. Make fake bookings as students so you can see every piece of how this works. What we're going to be looking at next week is what happens with our bookings after we create them. But in a nutshell, I'm going to be showing you first up that inside your Brightspace accounts, once you have your individual bookings calendars set up, individual services, you can in fact go into your subject sites in Brightspace and create a page for students to make their bookings. You could just give them that hyperlink that I gave all of you in the chat. But the other option that you have in here is to create a page inside Brightspace, which is what I'm doing here. We create a new page, and there is in fact a bookings template which has been made available for us to use inside Brightspace by going in and selecting template, and you'll see that there's one already waiting for you called bookings. You can customize this, but you'll see that it is very comprehensive. Book your supervised assessment. Before you do it, think about these things. There's a comms piece happening in here. And if you're telling them don't make more than one booking, then we have in here the option to insert your booking link right here. We go, oh, okay, I'm going to put my link in. And you could either paste the link that you made, or I could say book appointment, highlight that. whoops, and then put in the hyperlink right there. Apply that, and now that's linked, and students will be able to come into this page and open up the bookings calendar. So that template option is available to everybody. When you create a new page, you go to the template drop-down area and select bookings, and it will give you this page that you can then customize to your heart's desire before you make available to students. Give it a title, A2 bookings page. What does it look like? There it is, and then students can click on the link and it opens up the bookings calendar. So a nice clean way of providing the link to the bookings page to your students at the same time. All right, I'm going to stop there because I know we're at time. As I said, there is always a lot of extra stuff to talk about, and I'm happy to hang around and chat around any of this stuff for people that have burning questions around this. But we're going to continue the bookings conversation next week, where we start looking at the provisioning of recordings and things, what running the meeting inside Teams looks like, and how our markers, etc., can access the artifacts and assets associated with Microsoft Bookings. But that is our initial kind of introduction to the booking service, and I'm encouraging you all to get in there and start creating your own, to have a play with it, etc., and then we can pick up the conversation next week. So I'll stop the recording there, but as I said, I'm going to hang around so we can look at any outstanding questions that people might have, and we'll go from there.
Look,